NIL Now with Lauren Sisler and Kevin Jones.
If you want to learn more about name, image, and likeness, you need to go to The Source. The NIL Now podcast from Headline Studio and Reddit highlights the biggest storylines with comments from key guests in the college and high school NIL space.
NIL is not a cherry on top. It needs to be thought about as a part of these young men and women's future to, further their careers. You should be able to leave college with something.
Subscribe to NIL Now on Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Welcome in Rose City to the Soccer Made in Portland podcast. I'm Ryan Clark, joined by Chris Reifer. Some breaking Thorns news to top the pod. Adriana Leon from Manchester United is coming to Portland on a short-term loan. June 30th is when that loan expires. She will be with the team until then. 30-year-old winger who will add some depth up top with the absence of Janine Becky, who's out for the season with a torn ACL. Provides Leon an opportunity to stay fit heading into the World Cup. So double W for the Thorns and for Team Canada. And an important addition, I think, as the Thorns get ready for that World Cup break. So Chris, initial reactions there to the Adriana Leon arrival.
Kind of an interesting signing rental sort of situation. I think it makes sense for her. It makes a lot of sense for her for the reasons that you just said. It's kind of funny that she's in two teams sort of stepping into a spot vacated by the injury to Janine Becky. But nonetheless, it's an interesting rental for the next couple months. Very little downside. The only sort of expected major move that the Thorns may make, we expect to be in the summer after the World Cup. And so there's obviously a little bit of cap space to use. And the Thorns are going out to pick up another piece who I think is probably going to sort of slot in somewhere in the wing rotation, in a non-starting role would be my expectation. And so I would expect her to be competing with Izzy, competing with Michelle Vasconcelos for minutes. We'll see how those competitions shake out. She's not somebody who has, lengthy success. She's bounced around NWSL before she went over to England. Didn't have a huge amount of success in any of her stops in NWSL, but is a solid NWSL quality player. And so that's a little piece of depth that I think the Thorns probably wanted and needed since Becky got hurt. And now they have it for the next couple months. But, do I expect this to be a game-changing signing? I don't, but we'll see what she has to contribute. And then obviously she'll be highly motivated in getting ready for a World Cup.
Return to the field on Friday against the Houston Dash. It'll have been 13 days at that point since they last played in Kansas City. 4-1 win. Extremely convincing, league leading 8 goals for the Thorns, league best 7 goal differential. That's a +7 goal differential. And thus far, looking like a really dominant and difficult to deal with team, but the Houston Dash are a formidable squad as well, with plenty of capable goal scorers, and have proven themselves to be a solid group early in the season. Still, traveling to Portland is no easy task. And if the Thorns remain in the form they've been in, could be more of the same, could be a lopsided result. But the availability of individual role players and key contributors is a question, only because we're coming out of this international break. We've got players like Sophia Smith, who, a couple of days ago played pretty decent minutes for the U.S., and others playing for their respective countries who are coming back with varying levels of availability. So I would expect a good amount of rotation on Friday in terms of the lineup, and then more of a full strength team for that Challenge Cup game. That'll be about 5 days later, if the Thorns choose to take the Challenge Cup a little more seriously this year. There's plenty of motivation. You've got the equal pay initiative that's come out now, where the top prize is $1 million, and that is legit and real money. And these players, particularly the ones at the tail end of the roster, can use that a lot, and it would be very beneficial. So a lot of different storylines going into this one, but either way, fans on Friday are going to just be excited to see the Thorns back on the field.
I'm slightly annoyed that the Thorns are, because of the way the scheduling has worked out, that the Thorns are having to play on Friday after an international window. That is something that should be avoided at all costs, because it makes it a lot harder to get players back and ready in time, in time to play on the weekend following an international window. That's a little bit of an unforced error. The Thorns, obviously, there was a scheduling conflict with the Timbers on Saturday. I think there are a lot of people in Portland who would rather flip that, who gets the priority there. But, that's just a reality of the difference in the two squads. The Thorns' 8 goals, by the way, are 2 more than the Timbers have scored, even though the Timbers have played like 5 or 6 more games than the Thorns. I digress. Nonetheless, there are a number of folks, myself included, who would rather give the Thorns top billing at Providence Park rather than the Timbers. But in any event, it's unfortunate that there is Challenge Cup midweek that forces this game to be played on Friday rather than on Sunday, and deprives the national team players for both teams, a little bit more significant interference for the Thorns, but for both teams, deprives them of a couple days of rest and preparation for a league game. The Dash, to me, are a little bit of a mystery box still. They've been, they've got a win and a draw in their first 2 games. Kind of flat track heroes, though. They drew at home to Racing Louisville, which is not a particularly impressive draw on opening day. And then they won away 2-1 over the Red Stars. The Red Stars, to me, look like a team. 2 losses to start, especially now that Mallory Swanson is lost for the year. I think the Red Stars are probably wooden spoon candidates at this point. But they did beat him with Swanson, right? And so that's the Red Stars are, when they have Mallory Swanson, at very least punchers, right? You've got a chance because Swanson can score goals for you. But I don't think that's a Red Stars team that has sort of the top to bottom talent to be very good. And so I wouldn't necessarily say that is a signature win for the Dash. This would be, though, right? Even if the Thorns have some national team players with some limited minutes, this would be a signature win for them. And so, I don't think this is a Red Stars team that's easy to handicap at this point. I still wouldn't expect them to be in the top half of the league, but they also don't look like they're a wooden spoon contending kind of team. So not an easy game for the Thorns by any means. I don't expect them to treat it as an easy game. And if they have national team players who aren't sort of immediately locked back in,
7:30 p.m.
could be
on
a little bit
Friday. CBS Sports Network picking that one up. Paramount Plus streaming it. Should be an interesting matchup for the Thorns. And then obviously 5 days later, Challenge Cup begins. San Diego Wave on the road. Not a bad road trip. I kind of wish I was tagging along with them, to tell you the truth, with the weather that has been, forcing us to deal with the Oregon spring, I guess, the last couple of weeks. But the post-winter. Oh, Jesus.
Post-winter.
Well, I'm escaping to
34
Las Vegas
degrees
this
on my dog
weekend
walk
to
this morning.
celebrate Emma's 30th birthday. Yeah, so that'll be a lot of fun. Shout out to Emma,
nice.
The most loyal listener
that'll be fun.
of
Enjoy.
Soccer Made in Portland. So that'll be a fun week, and I can escape primarily the frigid and consistently wet weather around here. So
this last month or so has been like, it's like what the play-in tournament is for the NBA or MLS playoffs. This last month or so has been to spring. This is like spring play-in. It's not really spring yet.
Like it's comparable to the Timberwolves.
I guess it's
not
like
running
spring
anything
qualifying
on offense with Karl Anthony Towns on the bench is basically what Oregon spring is like.
That's
right now. So a little NBA, a little weather weaved in here.
That's right.
Let's talk MLS. Let's talk the Portland Timbers who are flailing, who are struggling mightily, but get your exactly.
Get your Elliott Smith going.
They're struggling, but there may be hope. There a little glint, a little shimmer of hope in the distance as players start to get healthy, but Then you add in the fact that, it's a revolving door because, Eric Williamson is the primary example.
Players get healthy, others
we are
go
all
out.
thinking of Eric and wishing him the best. He's out for the season now with another ACL tear, second of his career. Given his determination, you got to think that a guy like that will come back even stronger. So props to Eric for, maintaining a positive attitude on this. And he shut down his social media. So all the outside noise, that ain't going to be there for him. Yes, but still occasional listener.
Than Emma.
But yes, thank you, Emma, for always listening. We'll always be thanking her.
But apropos to Eric, you're spot on that it's a really frustrating one and disappointing one for him, and you certainly feel for him as a person. Obviously this was a season in which he was making a big push to get sort of back fully into the national team program after he sort of fell out of it when he had the last one. And so the ill timing is really frustrating and kind of maddening for Timbers fans. It's really maddening because it's another going through the revolving door, and he won't be coming out the other side and for a little bit, for the rest of the season, to be sure. And I mean, frankly, as Timbers fans, there hasn't been a lot fun to watch this year. One of the few things that's periodically been fun to watch has been Eric Williamson. And so now I don't know where's the fun going to come from in terms of the Timbers. I think they had a hard time turning some of that fun into productivity, but it was at least still fun. Now I don't think there's a whole lot of fun on the roster. It is, they are getting some guys back. It sounds like Paredes is going to be available for selection this season. Jimmy Chara seems to be on his way, but not ready this weekend. Same deal with Sebastian Blanco. We'll have to wait to see when they actually get back on the field, but it sounds like those are getting closer. But I mean, are any of those guys knights in shining armor?
I think if there ever was a knight that could storm the castle and make things a little more interesting or exciting, it's Evander, right? Because he played 45 last game. He's probably going to start this weekend, would be my guess, given the ramp up in training and in minutes. Whether he plays like 65, 70 or more is remains to be seen.
And whether he's going to end up being sort of that kind of savior for the Timbers, I don't think we've seen him put on that suit of armor yet. I don't think he hasn't jumped up on his big white horse. We haven't seen that yet from him. And frankly, I think it's probably a little bit unfair to put that kind of expectation on him right from the jump, especially given a number of the other absences. So, I mean, in that respect, I thought the Vancouver game was a little bit sobering because we did see Dyronis Bria get a good run out. We did see Evander come back in. We did see a lengthy stretch from Frank Boley, and
and it wasn't even any of those guys. It was literally Juan Mosquera.
90 minutes. So
he was, and Boley had, I think, the best XG.
That's right. Although Boley was involved in
the game, if I'm remembering correctly, potentially other than Mosquera. Yeah, I was gonna say
it was definitely
who had
Mosquera.
The best chance. And if they had tied the game on that, then the narrative would totally be different right now, right? But even still, I think if you look at it from an objective standpoint, they were abysmal for the majority of that match. They were not competitive. Yeah, they were not even close.
Abysmal. No. Not competitive against a team that was A, tired from CONCACAF Champions League, and B, although Vancouver has been, I think, solid to date in MLS, I don't think anybody thinks this is a better than mid-table Vancouver Whitecaps team. This was not LAFC. It wasn't the Seattle Sounders. And nonetheless, they got pumped like they were playing at LAFC.
Yeah, and if it weren't for Aljazevic, this is like a 2-3-4-0 result, right? He made a ton of goal-saving moments and was just huge.
And the AR and VAR. I mean, Vancouver put the ball in the net 3 times. And the, two of them were rightfully called off, but the Timbers were a little bit fortunate on both of those. And I mean, yeah, it was abysmal. Between the only reason that game was as close as it was, and the only reason that there was even a theoretical possibility, and I emphasize theoretical, that the Timbers could get anything out of it, was because they got very, very lucky.
And tactical issues right now? Or are we talking about buy-in with the coaching staff in terms of like players being motivated? I mean, Gio after the game, he has been one to take the blame for losses in the past, but this time he was pretty pointed in saying we're just trying to survive with the players that we have. And that's not a terribly motivating thing to say to a group of individuals who already are not being terribly productive. And I'm not sure something like that is going to really motivate them. Now there's other guys coming back who Gio wasn't really talking about in that scenario, but even still, these are still mostly your first team guys, your starters, your go-to guys, and to be relatively close to getting a result, even though you got dominated essentially, and to still be saying stuff like that about the team, I don't know. It strikes me as a little bit concerning.
I think the comment is just objectively fair. On one hand, like Gio is playing with half a deck right now, and that's just the reality. And so I think that's a major factor. I don't think the Timbers wouldn't be this abysmal if they had everybody available. They might not be very good, and I'm not convinced that the roster is very good even when fully healthy. But they wouldn't be this abysmal. I also think it's fair to point out that it's not exactly like this team has been playing with a bunch of kiss and vinegar. It's not like these have been highly spirited, really intense games that they've been losing. Frankly, they've showed their underside more than they've shown their hackles. And so I think that's a really fair question. Because it's not like frankly, we haven't seen much of a pulse. It's not like the guys have been really getting stuck in. It's not like they've been really fighting in duels. And frankly, it's not even like we've seen folks kind of get to points of frustration and seen tempers flare. It's largely been, I don't know if satisfaction with the losses is the right word, but it's been acquiescence in their fates in these games more than anything. And so I do think concerns about whether the team is motivated and is dialed in is fair, because I'm not sure that would have won them very many games, but in these losses there hasn't been a ton of fight in them, and I think that's fair. I also think it's very fair to look at Gio and say, half deck or not, this isn't a better team than it was 6 weeks ago. And regardless of the cards that you're dealt, it's frankly sort of the same thing we say about Chauncey Billups. Regardless of the cards that you're dealt, the expectation on you as the coach is that you're going to find a way to maximize those cards. And when you have sort of a lengthy runway with a group, even a depleted group like this, there's the expectation that we're going to see progress over the course of that runway. And I don't think we've seen it. I think that performance at Vancouver was every bit as bad as the performance at Atlanta. I think it was every bit as bad as some of the other ones that we've seen. The home game against LA Galaxy, a depleted LA Galaxy team that is in its own right very bad. And the Timbers looked very bad against them. And so I haven't seen a ton of progress, and I think it's very fair to expect more, even notwithstanding the really significant limitations in the players that they have available. So, I get Gio's comments. I think if I were the coach, I would probably make similar comments, or at least I would feel very similarly with respect to what I had to work with. But nonetheless, it's his job to maximize what he's worked with, and I don't think we've seen that. And that's a big part of why, when you talk about maybe Christian Paredes will play against Seattle, we'll see if he's available to start. Maybe Evander will see more minutes. Maybe Boley will see more minutes. Does that give me a ton of reason for optimism that they're going to suffer a significantly different fate against the Sounders? No, it doesn't. The simple reality is this has been, even notwithstanding some shifting personnel, a very comfortably bottom 5 team in the league so far this year. And they're probably not 5th. they're probably in the bottom 3. And the Sounders have arguably been a top 1 team in the league this year. And so that's...
Yeah, you would like somebody a little
matchup,
less
right?
daunting.
Not a ton of reason for optimism.
Your first game with quote unquote a full real starting lineup, right? Because you got Luria coming back. It depends who you ask, but yes,
it's still not a
more real, let's say, starting lineup than they have had in recent weeks, and with guys. Well.
Is Marvin Luria a significant upgrade over Diego Gutierrez?
But it's somebody, kick the tires on people. Look, I agree with you on principle. I think that there is not a lot of reason for optimism right now. I think that the team is who they are at the end of the day, regardless of personnel. And it doesn't feel like it did in past seasons where Timbers are just starting out slow and they're going to, pick it up in the second half of the season and they'll be okay. Yeah, maybe they'll get in as like the 8 or the 9 and that'll happen in terms of like a slight shift in form. But I don't see it being this sudden turnaround where okay, we're talking about the Timbers as an MLS Cup contender. They're not even in like that stratosphere right now. No, it's not really a possibility right now with
not even in the universe. No
health issues with the form, the tactics, everything just is not adding up well. That being said, I think there are 2 areas of potential optimism as the team trudges forward, right? You have the combination, I think, of Evander and Frank Boley is something to potentially be excited about, because we saw flashes during their stretch of playing together in the second half against Vancouver where the 2 of them at least displayed some level of creativity and ideas with the ball at their feet, right? Some level of aggressiveness that most of their teammates have really just not had at all season. And if those 2 guys can find their form, if they can build some chemistry together, those are 2 legitimately dangerous attacking players that can perhaps lift all boats in this sinking ship, so to speak, of the Portland Timbers attack. I guess sinking fleet of ships. Sure. And
the metaphor doesn't work great, but
those 2 guys I think are potential reason for optimism. The other is their defensive shape. It's been kind of inconsistent, and there were moments against Vancouver that were frankly, shocking and inexcusable. But most of the time, I think, especially lately and at an improved rate, I think that they defend decently well. The back line is solid enough to where if you have at least like a pulse on the other end of the field, you give yourself more of a chance. I think Zach McGraw has been the MVP of this team so far this season. He has legitimately shown that not only is he an MLS starter, but he belongs in that position and can be potentially a leader for this team as he becomes more of a veteran presence. So major props to Zach for how he's been playing. Alja Ivacic, saves your rear end whenever you make a mistake at this point, and continues to prove why he probably should have been starting from the beginning of the season. But that's an argument that he has had both privately and publicly. So plenty to discuss there. But
yeah, no kidding.
Those two things, and then maybe Alias being the third thing, are potential reasons for optimism, despite what very much feels like an uphill battle right now for this team.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think the jury is just still out on Evander and Boley. I agree with you that they had some moments, but also they played together most of the second half against Vancouver, and the Timbers created chance. Singular. One chance. Against a Vancouver team, by the way, that LAFC just beat 6-0 on aggregate in CONCACAF Champions League. So other teams are creating more than chance against Vancouver. And the Timbers did not create more than chance against Vancouver, even with Evander and Boley in there. And that's not to throw dirt on them by any means. I just think that it's too much to ask. I mean, if frankly your hopes are, frankly, your hopes are that you're going to be bailed out by a couple new signings coming in and immediately acclimating and being difference makers, you're probably in a bad spot. And that's sort of where the Timbers are with that. I'm not convinced defensively. I agree with you about the individual play of Zach McGraw. I think he's been probably the best player to date in a competition with very few competitors. And but I mean, as a whole, was that a good defensive performance against Vancouver? No, it wasn't. They needed their goalkeeper to play very well, and they needed 2 calls from the referees to avoid a multiple goal loss against a team that's not known for lighting the nets on fire. So I wasn't compelled. I didn't find a ton of reason for optimism in that overall defensive performance. And yeah, I think when Ivicic is healthy and in form and focused, he's a good goalkeeper. I think he's proven that, and he'll save some goals. But the problems in front of him are so numerous and manifest that I mean it's not apparent to me right now. If they get fully healthy, maybe this is a more competitive team just by a matter of kind of making incremental gains across the field. But I don't see the knight in shining armor. I don't know where it's going to come from, other than hoping that Evander and Boley and guys like that find their way, and that to me is a longer term project than any sort of short term hope.
Yeah, exactly.
Like I said, Elliott Smith, like player Elliott Smith.
There are 2 things that the Timbers want to get finished in all likelihood in the next week, from what I understand at this point. As they've discussed publicly, they want to pursue a center back with a good portion of the money that they got from Bill Tuiloma. They want to add another center back to this group. That would potentially push Dario Zupric to the bench, although he's been solid this year. Somebody more mobile, a little more, a little quicker, a little more versatile, I think would be beneficial next to Zach McGraw. That's something they want to get done, I know, before the transfer window closes here, which is coming up soon. And additionally, I'm hearing at this point that there may be a T2 signing that gets up to the first team, and that could be any number of players. One would think, given that the midfield is lacking right now, particularly at the defensive midfield spot, that a guy like Noel Caliscan out of LMU, who has done well in the T2 spot and has scored 2 goals, including his first one was pretty dang impressive. You would think somebody like that would probably be the leading candidate to potentially get a first team call up. We'll see. At this point, the next week is potentially important for the Timbers in terms of adding 2, maybe 3 players to their roster. Does that fix all their problems? No, of course not. And it's going to be a while before either of those potential additions are even regular contributors, if at all, right? So the form has to change.
Yeah.
The personnel is going to change. You're going to get guys back. Jimmy Chara will be back. Sebastian Blanco looks like he's probably going to be back relatively soon. That's good, but the form still has to change. And that's probably, I hate to say, not going to happen on Saturday against Seattle. Seattle's a very, very good team in very good form. Timbers will be up for that game, but they're still pretty severely outmatched. So they would likely hope that in the weeks after that, they would start to see that upward trajectory, add more players to the team, and go from there.
And go from there. Yeah, it's pretty dark for the Timbers right now, and I think, a week ago going into the Vancouver game, we were trying to find reasons for smoking hopium from their last couple, and I think I think the Vancouver game was a bit of a cold shower. In that respect, that has sort of left us in this spot now. So, yeah. Do we want to talk about that more?
We did.
I think we made calls for folks to
I have opened
send
the
things into the
mailbag,
and I think we should probably just open the mailbag at this point.
Are spilling out of the bag here in GIF form, in Word form,
spilling out.
We've got some tweets. So, which Timbers player group do you have the most confidence in right now, and what doesn't need a fix? Goalkeeper, center back, midfield, forward, wingers, outside backs. Goalkeeper. that's my answer. It's been an adventure, but
although it's been an adventure,
yes, I mean,
it's nonetheless,
of all the positions
for non-soccer reasons, it's been an adventure.
On field issue, right? So, yeah.
I think the fullbacks are also going to be fine in the long run. Claudio Bravo hasn't played great, but he had kind of a messed up early in preseason. And so I don't think, and apparently, although depending on who you talk to, also has a little bit of a knock right now. But I think when they get Claudio Bravo and Juan David Mosquera back into the fullback positions, which I think they both should be in, I think Mosquera is more effective as a fullback than he is as a winger, even in the attack. Once they get there, I don't have a ton of concerns about that position. I think they're in pretty good shape there. Everywhere else, I think there's room for improvement. I mean, the striker situation is almost a meme at this point, where you just kind of just keep throwing guys at it and just to see what happens. They have, as Gio has pointed out a few times, they have 5 number 9s on the roster, which is not great, and none of them are really
and the most obvious
solutions
among them
at
as a
that place,
solution
which is
the
even
newest
more
guy,
not
right?
great,
or the injured guy.
Or the injured guy. And I think the newest guy is still a bit of a mystery box, and I think the injured guy is still injured and is going to be injured for a couple more months at least. So, yeah, I think fullbacks and goalkeepers are my answer. And hey, look, at goalkeeper, David Bingham has proven himself to be a perfectly capable backup.
Wow, what an endorsement. Daniel asks, what does the homegrown tag on Eric's contract mean, given that he's on a senior contract and making more than the senior roster minimum? And what are the implications for cap relief if the Timbers put him on the season-ending injury list, which, to my understanding, they are going to put Eric on the season-ending injury list now that he's had that surgery and it was successful on Wednesday.
So the season-ending injury list question is an interesting one, that it will be interesting to see how the Timbers play it. It's not clear entirely in the rules whether... So just to back up, with the season-ending injury list rules, you basically get to have one player who you put on your list who you get cap relief for. And, Eric would be a promising option for that. He's his salary, which I do think at this point hits the cap because I think he's beyond sort of the window of homegrown designation, even though although there might be some sort of exam implications there. My understanding is that Eric does hit the cap at this point, and last year he made about 550,000 if my memory is serving me correctly, and so he's a decent cap hit. Now, by getting one player, one sort of cap relief for one player through the season ending injury list, it's totally plausible that the move for the Timbers is going to be to put Eric on that list to get that cap relief, and then to sort of invest that in the summer transfer window. It wouldn't completely shock me if the Timbers keep their powder dry a little bit on that. They're almost certainly not going to be able to use that cap space. I mean, maybe they'll need it in this window and they're going to sort of be forced to make that move now. But if they don't need that cap space in this window, I would kind of expect them to keep that powder dry for a couple more months at least, while they're waiting to see how the situation with Blanco, how successful his return is, and all of that, because Blanco's cap hit is much, 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 much more significant. It is up toward the TAM cap. I think he was on 1.7-ish million last year, if I'm remembering right, which is right at the TAM cap. And I think the reporting was when they signed him that he was sort of a max TAM kind of signing when they re-signed him back in the winter of 2021, 2022. And so if Blanco's return fails and he's not going to be able to play full time, which I think we have to entertain as a possibility. Hopefully that doesn't happen. But I think that has to be acknowledged as a possibility. Then it may be more advantageous for them to use that spot on him. Now, the Timbers do also have, it used to be known as their off-season buyout. I've referred to it as the amnesty provision in reference to the NBA's one-time similar provision that allowed a team to buy out a contract and get cap relief. That is no longer just an off-season only rule. You can do it at any time during the season. And so they also do have that at their fingertips. That for me has always been sort of a seeking missile toward Jaroslav Niezgoda and his contract, which is also up near in terms of cap hit that max TAM threshold. But there is some optionality between those two mechanisms to free up some cap space. So it wouldn't shock me at all if they need the cap space soon, if they use that on Eric and that's sort of just done and dusted. But if they don't need the cap space immediately, I think.
What are the odds of Gio leaving Portland after a loss to Seattle this weekend? 0. Yes, 0 after a loss to Seattle. What do
0 after a loss to Seattle
you two do to deal with mental stress? This definitely isn't related to Portland men's sports at all. That's from Johnny. Yeah, usually I watch sports. That is a good stress reliever.
Right now, I watch the Thorns.
It's enjoyable to watch the Thorns. Yeah. What's going on?
Also, I've been enjoying Love Is Blind. Yeah. I mean, it's pretty good trash TV. And as trash TV goes, I enjoy it, and it's a little bit of a guilty pleasure. And so, yeah, I mean, it's been the Portland Seattle season. So it's all people from the Pacific Northwest, which has been interesting. Some interesting characters, some really good quality folks, and some
I would say
folks that are more suited for trash TV.
To relieve stress. Journalism can be kind of a stressful profession, right? It can also be pretty chill. There's times where I'm just chilling during the day and don't have anything on the docket. That's nice. But yeah, I mean, in order to deal with stress, sometimes I drink wine. That's a good stress reliever. I had a whole vacation that was essentially just eating fresh handmade pasta in these little Italian villages and drinking like amazing wine, right? So that's a stress reliever. I love travel. Even though travel can be stressful, I enjoy doing that. In terms of regular life stress, I mean, deep breathing is something that I have learned to do in recent years. I am someone that can get overwhelmed occasionally. I have made it no secret that I am someone who has dealt with anxiety in my life, who has dealt with depression. Mental health is something that matters a lot to me. And deep breathing is just one of those strategies. And I should do it more. I'd like to hold myself accountable to dealing with those stresses in better ways. But yeah, I mean, those would probably be my most significant strategies. Going for a walk with the dog, can't beat that, as long as it's not like raining outside. Taking my boy Porter, my little Australian Labradoodle,
which has been a lot,
on a walk. He's not little, he's like 60 pounds, he's a big boy, but taking him on a walk, always good. So yeah, I mean, get outside. Spring is almost here, right? If you see the sun peeking out, take advantage of that. That's what I'd have to keep telling myself.
If we win this one, spring will be here.
Exactly.
We will have gotten through play in spring and just fully gotten to spring. If we lose it's gonna be like Groundhog Day. We got to go back 6 more weeks
right now. How excited are you for the debut of hashtag
That's exactly right.
Yes, Friday against the Dash. The tattoo kit makes its highly anticipated debut. How excited are you, Chris?
I mean, I'm excited for the game on Friday. Maybe for different reasons. But I am excited for the game on Friday.
I'm pretty indifferent on it. The current temperature of the following seats.
Yeah.
This is from the Tana Bros reporting account, one of the great Twitter accounts.
This is a good discussion
on Timbers Twitter. Following seats, what is the temperature? Gio, the physical training staff, and Ned Grabavoy. Let's do it in order here and start with Gio.
Let's start with
It's
Gio.
A pretty cold seat. I mean, they signed him to a significant extension in the offseason, and I would not anticipate Merritt Paulson having any desire to buy him out. Gio, you can be critical of, certainly, how he's coached this team this year. He has, as you pointed out, played with a short stack of cards, and he has said as much publicly. Now, whether that's the right move for him to say that publicly or not for me to say, but I think that there are questions for sure about, is he the right guy to lead this team moving forward? But I don't think those questions are being asked by people in the Timbers front office. And that's not a product of, they're ignoring the obvious. I think that Gio, for the most part, has done a pretty good job for the Timbers over the years. He's gotten them to 2 finals. There has been a regression, definitely, going into last season and into this. And I would say that the seat isn't ice cold. It's kind of like room temp right now for him, given the pressures of losing. And if it gets worse, then maybe the temperature goes up a little bit. Even if they have a rough season this year, I would be very, very surprised if they moved on from him, unless he saw a better opportunity for himself somewhere else, maybe in a second division in Europe or something, as an opportunity pops up. There was the rumor. Yeah, it is, because there was a rumor of him potentially joining Venezia a couple of years ago. That didn't come to fruition. So I don't think that his seat is hot. I'm not expecting anything to happen in terms of Gio, regardless of how this season turns out.
The nature of sports is that if you have a couple losing seasons in a row, there are going to be questions about whether the coach should remain. Right? That's just kind of how it is universally. That's not even necessarily a comment on Gio. That's just how it is. 2022 was a failed season for the Timbers, and the first 7 weeks of 2023 have been a failure. And so, from that perspective, I think the questions are totally right, or totally rightfully asked, and I think the conversation is completely fair. Even though I like Gio as a person quite a lot, and even though I think there are certainly some ways in which he's been set up to really struggle this year. All of that notwithstanding, the conversation is completely fair. And it's just kind of natural when you're in this kind of place. But I agree with you 100%. I mean, I think it would be, short of scandal or something like that, I think it is difficult to foresee a way that 2023 would play out where Gio would not likely come back from 2024. And not to be dismissive about it, but look, if the Timbers aren't willing to buy out 1 year of Yaroslav Niezgoda's contract, even though last year he lost his starting job down the stretch when the attack broke down to a guy who's not even a striker, and even though he occupies a near max TAM bit of cap space, and even though he doesn't have, frankly, near the resume that Gio has in terms of his accomplishments at the club, if they're not willing to buy out 1 year of Niezgoda's contract, I find it hard to believe that they would be willing to buy out multiple years of Gio's contract. And so, I think that is probably the truth. Whether that is how it should be or whether that reflects the level of ambition in the club that we hope it would have is another question altogether. But I think realistically, is Gio the Timbers coach at the beginning of the season in 2024?
Was the training staff.
Probably.
And this has been a discussion online.
That's hot.
Pretty excessively over the start of this season. And I there has been good reason for, I think,
and for good reason,
skepticism and concern. I think that the method by which people have been talking about this issue has been at times short-sighted. And I understand the frustration. I understand the worries about, is this team doing the right thing in terms of preparing its players, in terms of injury prevention, and in terms of the way and where it trains. I mean, they play on turf. Gio has said he doesn't like turf. Nobody around this team, players, coaches, executives, like the turf. But the front office right now is, yes, there are. That's what I was going to say. Is that,
there's
like,
some executives who could have done more?
There
about
are people in positions of power who can change that. The feasibility of that happening in the near future is not high. There are a lot of roadblocks that the team says it faces in terms of changing the surface at Providence Park from turf to grass. I don't think it is as narrow and as simple. It's a minor factor. Both Gio and Ned Grabavoy have spoken to me on the record about the training methods and about the fact that internally the team is examining whether or not what it's doing is proper and whether or not they need to change some of those things. That being said, they're not considering firing Stephanie Ludwig. They're not considering firing any of her assistants or any of the people that report to her. And to suggest...
Well, and that's not even necessarily Ludwig and the training staff often comes in sort of at the back end. It's often the sports science kind of stuff and frankly, even just the coaching staff in the way they're designing their sessions.
Yes, and I think that is something that
more
absolutely merits examination and criticism. Who are the people outside of your club that you have longstanding relationships with? The surgeons, the doctors, the physical therapists. What are your training methods, and how are you making sure individual players are able to deal with injury prevention, but also recover from injuries, come back stronger or as strong, or a version of themselves where they can play and contribute. All of those things are being examined, but for every reaction to every injury to just be fire the training staff, or what the F are they doing, they need to have a complete overhaul, I don't think is rational. I think that you need to look at this from a more specific perspective. And you were talking about the sports science department, and we've talked about training methods and the individuals outside of the club that they have relationships with. That needs to happen. And I agree with those sentiments completely. But I think we can stand to be a little more rational in this discussion.
So I think folks are perfectly rational about it, and they don't always necessarily have the sophistication of the language to be able to talk about it. But look, the bottom line is, and this even goes back to last season, the Timbers have had a ton of injuries, and it's totally reasonable when that's the case to say, hey, are these guys being physically prepared to be able to play? And I think that is a totally fair, and frankly, I think that's where most fans are. I mean, it is really hard as a fan on the outside to sort of get in deeper to what the specifics are. But the fact that there is an internal evaluation going on says everything you need to know how hot the seat is. The seat is hot. I don't exactly know whose seat is hot. I can't tell you who the exact person is or who the exact department is that has that hot seat. But
yes,
the seat
I
is
agree
hot.
with that. Yes, completely. That
Sort of
yes, they're
talking about this generally. I frankly brush off the turf concerns with respect to the Timbers. The simple reality is the Timbers train on turf once every 2 weeks or so. When they train at Providence Park, it's usually only like a pre-match day, 1 or 2 days before the match. They'll do it once, and then they play on turf. 17 times a year at their home games, and then in a smattering of away games. Other than that, they train on grass. So 90% of their full physical load is on grass. And there's nothing that any data supports about sort of periodic exposure to turf that would lead to this kind of a mushroom cloud of injuries or expect that to be the case. We don't see it with the Thorns. We don't see it with the Sounders. We don't see it with any number of other teams that play on turf as much or more than the Timbers. And so I think the case for turf being a significant part of this discussion is very, very weak. That's not to say that I don't think it would be better if Providence Park had grass. I do. That's not even necessarily an injury issue for me. I just think it's a better playing surface, and I think basically everybody agrees on that. I think the people who shout about that on Twitter are largely preaching to the choir. And frankly, I'm a little bit frustrated by the inertia that we've seen from the front office in making that happen. We've been told for a long time that, if only this barrier or that barrier falls, then grass is more realistic. Well, we've seen many of those barriers fall. We've seen more of the factors that would allow for grass to be installed at Providence Park be put within the club's control, and yet it hasn't happened yet. And there's a longer discussion to be had about that. But in terms of this injury discussion, I think that is a very, very small factor, if even a factor at all. But in terms of needing a hard look at how they're preparing players to play, how they're recovering from sessions, how they're just getting guys ready to go, I think that seat is hot. And I think that's what folks are saying. I just think it's really hard from the outside to really get much more specific than that. But I think our sort of fans' inability to get more specific than that
agreed. And
isn't a basis to shut down the conversation.
Well, it could on the internet. I guess any conversation on the internet could be more rational, but it could serve to be a little more rational and I think respectful of the individuals in those positions. At the same time, it's impacting the team, and I'm sure the players are asking these questions. I'm sure that they are concerned, especially when their livelihoods are on the line. Yeah. I mean, Jake Gleason had a lawsuit.
It's their careers, it's their bodies that are on the line,
and that's a whole nother can of worms. But the last seat that the Tana Bros were questioning was Ned Grabavoy, the GM of the Timbers. Cold. He just started the job. He's somebody that they believe in. He's somebody that he's had one hand tied behind his back. There's been a lot of external factors that have made it more difficult for him, and internal factors. He's somebody who they want to fill his staff out relatively soon, and they're going to. It's just a matter of when, and the sooner the better, because it makes his life easier. He was that type of person to Gavin Wilkinson. when Gavin was the GM, and he hasn't had those type of people behind him, and that does make it inevitably difficult.
He's basically been doing his
so we got to give him grace.
And Gavin Wilkinson's
that's extremely hard, and
for the last 6 months,
the pressures of a
That's
general
hard.
manager in MLS are high. And Ned knows that, but give him a little grace. I would say his seat is not warm at all. I know that the front office believes in him. They're going to stick with him for likely multiple years before that ever really becomes a conversation. So that Ned's fine. What? Yeah,
I think there's a bigger discussion though to be had, and that's not to completely absolve Ned. I mean, he is the top of the soccer organization on the Timber side, and he's been that functionally for 6 months. And so, I mean, at some point, the fact that they haven't filled that spot, he at least partially bears responsibility for. It sounds like they're going to be building that out. So hopefully soon. We've been hearing that for a while, and it's long overdue. That's partially on him as well at this point. But I mean, frankly, it's weird that they waited so long to formally give him the head job, even though that seemed like an inevitability from the jump. I think that's set him back quite a ways, because it sounds like they didn't really even begin the process of hiring a technical director or scouting director until they formally gave him the top job, which were 3 really critical months lost. And I mean, even when you sort of zoom out a little bit and kind of just look at the issues popping up across the soccer side of the organization, I think it's very fair to say this is not a well-functioning organization right now. I mean, when you're talking about how Gio Savarese is playing with half a deck, when you're talking about him not being set up for success, when you're talking about Ned Grabavoy not being set up for success, when you have to sort of caveat all of these discussions about all of these principal players in various ways, you've got to take a step back and say, this isn't going well. This just isn't going well from an organizational perspective. And whether it's lack of resources or lack of ambition, or just lack of organization and direction, that's a totally fair thing to be saying at this point. Because if you have these principal players in the organization who aren't being set up for success, and I don't think they are right now, then you need to take that more seriously from an organizational perspective and look at it from a kind of top-down approach. And so, I think I agree with you as to the immediate take about whether Ned's seat is hot. It is not. I mean, the guy's had one transfer window in which he was playing at least one, and it sounds like multiple personnel down in his front office. And so that transfer window has gone poorly. Don't get me wrong, but kind of set up to fail. And he'll get more. But if you are concerned at a higher level about just the health of the Timbers organization, those concerns are completely fair, because they have fires on multiple fronts right now. And when that's the case, it's frankly a lot harder just to say, oh, it's just because Gio's bad, or, oh, it's just because Ned's bad. You have to
will wrap
consider
the
organizational issues,
question and answer portion of this podcast with one final question from Jolin. What movies have y'all seen so far this year, and or what ones are you looking forward to this year? So, Chris, you see any movies lately? I feel like you would know.
I haven't seen any movies lately. I don't know if I have. I'm not a huge movie watcher. Mostly because, like, other than sports, like, sports sort of get my 2-hour segments.
Yeah.
Other than that, it's like smaller bites of TV. What about, you're the movie buff
this
here.
year
you are the true movies made in Portland.
There hasn't been
so what have you seen that's
I
not
would
your
say
soccer
so far of great movies yet. I think that those are to come later this year. The first one that I saw that was exciting for me was in January. I saw Skinamarink, which is a horror movie made for like $15,000 in some guy's childhood house in Canada. Very strange art housey horror where it essentially evokes the feeling of being a child trapped in a nightmare, right? It's a lot of static shots of like the corner of like a ceiling, and just like you're like a little kid in the dark in your house at night. And the premise is that it's two kids wake up in the middle of the night when their dad is missing and all the windows and doors in their house are gone. That sounds like a nightmare, right? And it was one of the scariest movies I've ever seen, despite it not in any way being a traditional horror movie. And I love horror movies. So that was not fun. If you're if you're a sicko like me about well, yeah, you got to be a horror movie
This is a
sicko
really
to
bright and
really
cheery
enjoy it.
podcast.
So if you are, go on AMC Plus and watch it. It's still on there. It's not in theaters anymore. It was much more enjoyable, I think, in a theater experience. Women Talking saw a few days after that. That was a great film. John Wick Chapter 4. I'm a big Wick man, and my God, the detail and the choreographed stunts and the sheer will to make a movie like this was amazing. I mean, if you are willing to not worry about, these small things like plot and character development, it's a tremendous film. It's something that, like, if we're going to have these hyper violent, like absurd, over the top, big money movies in this country, then why not have something like this? John Wick Chapter 4 was superb. If you're a fan of the Wickiverse, it's great. If not, it's still enjoyable. It's kind of hard to follow if you haven't actually watched the weirdly complicated but also uncomplicated previous movies. But it kicks ass, and I could not say more positive things about it. The other one that I've seen is Air, the Nike movie. There are inaccuracies for sure. You can look it up online. OregonLive.com had a nice little breakdown. Yeah, well, yes, there are plenty of inaccuracies. It's not a documentary, is what you should keep in mind. But I thought it was a great sports movie. Rarely am I ever excited by, like, hungry sports capitalists seeking to profit off of the labor of another individual. But this was actually a genuinely fun and heartwarming movie about, like, a guy in Michael Jordan who changed sports, but more specifically about people like Phil Knight and Sonny Vaccaro at Nike, who, along with others who arguably deserve more credit in this film than they got, they hit it big time. Nike was in a weird spot in the 80s, and boy, did Michael Jordan catapult them out of that spot, because that was just it was a good movie. It was filled with 80s nostalgia. It's what you want. It's a good dad movie. It's good to have on in the background while you're, like, vacuuming or, like, doing the dishes. It's Yes, he did. He directed and he plays Phil Knight. So.
Did Affleck direct it? Okay. Yeah. I mean, it seems like it's right down Main Street for Ben Affleck. Like 80s nostalgia.
Yeah,
like
it is
just like
a
much movie
more
made by a man
mine.
of our generation.
The only
my
thing
generation
missing
more
from the
this.
Affleck verse was a Boston accent. But you can get that in the Dunkin' Donuts commercials, so that's fine.
There you go. I'm pulling one envelope out of the mailbag as well, because Rich asks a two-parter that I think should be addressed, and that I have takes on both. First is with the rumor of Amadine Henry potentially signing with Angel City this summer, could you rank the top 5 international players to ever play for the Thorns? I would be happy to, Rich. Number 5, and this is with apologies to Nidhi Nonger. I'm going Rocky Rodriguez, and I'm defining international, by the way, as non-North American players. So no Canadians, no Americans.
Canada is technically another
Canadians,
country.
but you are
for
overlord, so you're not considered
podcast.
But anymore.
Yes,
it is technically another country, but they rule this particular part of the country. We are merely a Canadian colony at this point. and so and so I'm not counting them as international. So number 5, Rocky Rodriguez. I debated for a long time between Rocky and Nadine. I actually decided that Rocky's superlative performance late last year in leading to the Thorns' 3rd star is what got her the number 5 spot. Number 4, Natalia Kuika, who I think has actually been a little bit underrated in her time as a Thorn. She's one of the best fullbacks in NWSL. She has been that since she showed up and has become a bit of a cornerstone, or at least a bit of a really reliable player for the Thorns. She has been phenomenal. And so she comes in at number 4. Number 3 with some upside is Hina Sugita, who I think may be pushing number 2 at this point. But Sugita has been really, really good for the Thorns since coming last year. If she repeats that performance or builds on it this year, as it looks like she's poised to do, it wouldn't surprise me if she bumps up one spot. But currently sitting at number 2 for me is the aforementioned Amandine Henry. Mandy was an anchor in a midfield that just absolutely dominated NWSL on the way to the Thorns' 2nd star. That is something that we should not forget, even though she was here only for a good time, not for a long time. She was phenomenal as the Thorns' number 6 in a midfield unit with Lindsay Horan that just absolutely crushed the league. And so she is number 2 for me. Number 1, and this again is a player whom I wish had been with the Thorns for longer, and frankly was here during a bit of a dark period of Thorn soccer, but she was an undeniable light. Vero Buquet. One of the best players to ever play for the Thorns, one of the better players to ever play in NWSL, had an unbelievable run as the Thorns 10, just totally dominant, and really had some fun years when Kim Little was dominating for the Reign and Vero was dominating for the Thorns. That was super fun to watch, even though the team struggled as a whole. I still give the top spot to Vero, and I think that's going to take somebody coming in and really having an extended run of success to upset.
No,
any objections
I
to my top five? Anybody you're saying you're out of your mind?
I think that is an area you're not going to find me arguing against. All
right,
1 through 5, I'm with you.
All right, nailed it. So I said this is a 2-parter. Part 2, food question. Which 2 do you prefer with your fish and chips? Tartar, ketchup, a lemon slice, or malt vinegar? I'm going to add slightly to Rich's hypothetical. We have to assume that these are quality fish and chips. These aren't like, it's not like whatever the Gordon's fisherman pulled out of Blinky's pond. These are, you got quality fish, nicely breaded, and also, I think critically, quality fries. So which 2 are you choosing between tartar
ketchup, for the fish, and probably ketchup for the fries, right? Go. But it's hard to only pick 2 because adding some type of vinegariness to the fish, I think is an essential experience. Yeah, you need a little cut. I think it is dependent on the fish itself. If we're talking the highest quality, the cleanest fry on the fish, not too greasy, then yeah, go for the oil. But tartar sauce for most fish and chips, I would say, is the move. I had some interesting fish and chips when I was in England at 18 years old. I was in one of the shires. I can't remember. It's the one that Shakespeare is from. There's a lot of shires, but I was outside of London at the place.
There are so many.
Yes. Oh God.
Including the
cringe. No, that's actually a pretty good one. So I had oil with it at this fish and chip spot in England, and it was really good. But that was essentially only good because those were not your typical roadside greasy fish and chips, which you can get. The Oregon coast has a great selection of fish and chips spots up and down, but you can get a greasy plate of fish and chips on the Oregon coast, and it's happened to me. And that requires, I think, some of the creaminess and the cool taste of tartar sauce, which I enjoy. Not everybody's a tartar person.
Yeah, so for me, the answer entirely depends, and this is why I modified the hypothetical slightly. The answer entirely depends on the quality of the fish and chips. If the fish and chips are good, then I'm actually going to go lemon slice and malt vinegar, because I like to taste the fish. I like that to be, I mean, when you have good fish, it's very, very tasty. And I like the little bit of citrus that the lemon brings. And then the bit of tart that you get from the malt vinegar, I think is great. And in that scenario, I'm going largely with nothing on the fries. When you have good fries, I don't think they need anything. I think they stand on their own. And so that is my approach if I have good fish and chips. If they fall to even average, though, I flip entirely. Then you need ketchup to accent the fries. And so I bring in ketchup at that point. And tartar, even though tartar for me is a very high risk proposition, because bad tartar, where it's basically just like mayonnaise and unidentifiable pickled vegetables, can be just awful, and I hate it. But good tartar is very tasty. and if the fish is mediocre, then it needs something that's going to be a little bit more powerful to carry the experience through. And so if we're talking about lower quality, I would go tartar ketchup. But assuming higher quality fish and chips,
we will wrap on food
give
made
me my
in Portland there. I may go grab myself some fish and chips for lunch today. Where? In the fine city of Beaverton? Who's to say? If you've got a good spot that's got fish and chips that's within like 15 minutes of Beaverton, because I don't really want to drive longer than that, let me know. You can follow me and tag me with your fish and chip recommendations on Twitter at Ryan T. Clark. Follow and tag Chris in all other types of food recommendations at Chris Reifer. Maybe he wants fish and chips too. Who knows? At Soccer Maiden PDX on Twitter. Follow us there. Like us, subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a review if you so choose, and we will be back next week. Thanks.